Welcome to Ufahamu Africa, a podcast about life and politics on the African continent. I'm Kimmy Dion, one of your hosts. We don't have an episode for you this week, but I'm going to read you some bonus content in honor of World Media Freedom Day. And the content comes from our partners at Good Authority. Good Authority is a blog and podcast dedicated to bringing insights from political science research to a broader public. This piece was written by colleagues at Afrobarometer, Jeffrey Conroy-Krutz, Komi Amewunou, and Kelechi Amakoh. Their piece is titled, Despite Africa's Digital Media Boom, Huge Access Gaps Persist. This was originally published at goodauthority.org on May 7th, 2024. They write, on August 21st, 1995, Ghana became the first country in West Africa with a permanent internet connection. Within months, around 100 people in the country were shelling out more than $100 a month for a connection. Most people were shut out of this new technology, though. The internet was unaffordable for the average Ghanaian, as one local IT professional observed. Almost 30 years later, millions of Ghanaians and hundreds of millions across Africa have regular access to digital media. They even carry it around in their pockets. Cheaper smartphones and faster download speeds have brought the internet and social media to mass consumers. However, equality in digital media access remains an issue. Some groups, like women, the poor, and those living in rural areas, have fewer opportunities to get online. Africa's digital divides are persistent. In many cases, the divides are growing. These inequalities could have far-reaching consequences for everything from political knowledge and civic engagement to economic opportunities. We track changes in digital media use across Africa by looking at survey data collected by Afrobarometer, an independent Pan-African research network. In nationally representative surveys conducted across 31 African countries about a decade ago in 2014 and 2015, we found that just over 1 in 5, or 21%, of respondents said they use the internet at least a few times a week to get news. In the latest surveys from those same countries in 2021 through 2023, the share regularly using the internet nearly doubled to 41%. Use of social media for news via WhatsApp, Twitter, Facebook, and other platforms also rose substantially from 21% to 45%. The data from many countries shows a remarkable jump in regular use of digital media for news. For example, just looking at regular use of social media sites for news, Cameroon has seen a 49 percentage point increase in the last decade, with Gabon 45 points, Togo 39 points, Senegal 38 points, Cote d'Ivoire 37 points, and Mauritius 37 points, following a similar pattern. Some countries have seen much smaller gains, including Nigeria, up only 6 points in regular social media use for news, Mozambique 6 points, Uganda 8 points, and Namibia 8 points. Still, across the continent, social media and the internet are radically changing how Africans access news. Early adopters of digital media in Africa tended to be very different from the rest of the population, as was the case elsewhere. By 2014 and 15, even though access no longer cost hundreds or thousands of dollars a year, the internet and social media were still disproportionately tools for those with more disposable income. Younger Africans were more likely to access relatively new technologies than older groups. Those with more education had greater literacy skills to read websites and social media posts. Better networks privileged urban over rural populations. And perhaps because of cultural norms or lack of available time, women were online far less than men. As digital media use has become more widespread, we might expect these digital divides to shrink or even disappear. After all, regular use of digital media for news has increased, often very significantly, for all of these less connected groups. Women have seen a 25 percentage point increase in regular use of digital media for news, from 18% to 43%. For women over 35, that figure jumped 27 points, from 11% to 38%. Digital media access among rural dwellers is up 20 points, from 11% to 31%, and the jump was 22% for those with a primary level education, up 18 points from the 4% in the 2014 survey. However, digital divides are not going away, and that's because comparison groups are seeing equal or even larger increases in digital media use. For instance, the 25-point increase among women is about the same as the 26-point jump among men. That means the digital divide on gender lines remains virtually unchanged. We see a similar story for digital access among those with different levels of education. Digital media access among youth, people under 36, was up 25 points, 31% to 56%, which is nearly the same as the 27-point increase among older citizens. Along other lines, digital divides are actually larger. In 2014 and 15, urban dwellers were 27 percentage points more likely to use digital media regularly for news than rural dwellers. Today, that gap is actually 36 points. About 67% of urban dwellers regularly use digital media for news, a 36-point increase that far exceeds rural dwellers' 27-point gain. The gap has also widened for those with less education. What was a 36-point gap between those with a primary school education or less and those with a higher education levels has jumped to a 47-point gap. This is because the 18-point increase in the lower education group is eclipsed by the 29-point increase in the higher education group. If more and more Africans rely on the internet and social media to get their news, why aren't digital divides fading away? Part of the answer might lie with the fact that different groups are positioned better to get connected. First, high data costs continue to limit access. Africans pay more for data than people in any other region of the world. Zimbabweans pay an average of $43.75 per 1 gigabyte of data. Compare this to Israelis who pay just 2 cents per gigabyte. Although there is wide variation between countries, Malawians currently pay the least for data on the continent, at 38 cents per gigabyte on average. Still, costs are often prohibitive. Second, mobile broadband access is increasing rapidly across the continent, with 75% of the population living in areas with 3G coverage in 2019. But rural populations remain underserved, especially by faster 4G coverage. In 2022, only 22% of Chadians, 20% of Ethiopians, and 12% of Mauritanians lived in areas with 4G coverage. A final point. These barriers tend to disproportionately affect women, who have less disposable income and lower levels of formal education. And women often simply have less time to get online due to extra burdens related to childcare and household duties. In many single-device households, men are more likely to claim responsibility over the phone, which creates large gender gaps in mobile access in most countries. The good news is that Africa's divides may eventually start to shrink. Data and devices continue to become more accessible. Many rural areas across the continent are getting faster connection speeds. And developers of smartphones and apps are working to improve accessibility to populations with limited literacy. However, as long as digital divides persist, they will have real consequences for Africans. Information related to health, economic opportunities, and education is increasingly available online. That means people without internet access will not be able to take advantage of public and private services that could increase their living standards. And while analysts are rightfully concerned about the potential for digital platforms to spread both misinformation and disinformation, citizens can also access information online to make informed electoral decisions and hold government officials accountable. Making policy changes to reduce digital divides will therefore be necessary to reduce economic, social, and political inequalities across the continent. That's all for this week of Ufahamu Africa. Come back next week when we'll have a full episode for you. Until then, Safiri Salama.